Everyone, my name is Francisco Escobar, and I'm the host of this show, Conversamos. As we continue our second season focusing on La Familia and Latinidad, this episode is going to be on raising and growing up anti-racist and anti-patriarch. All here as Latin Entertainment presents Conversamos.
Is it that wrong? I'm making a song, I'm taking it back for the platform that I formed. Music's helping me transform. I run the reservoir, the predator, like a hungry carnivore. When I'm breaking through these heavy doors, this is Desert Storm. A metaphor to show I'm equipped and informed. I'm striking with the mega.
Before we announce our panel, we'd like to promote this episode's business spotlight. Rosebud Boutiqueca, a small Latino-run business that sells tops, bottoms, dresses, accessories, makeup, and more. Check them out as they donate 10% of the profits to women organizations and charities. Follow them at Rosebud Boutique. That is Rosebud Boutique. Now let me introduce you to our panel. We have Alba Lamar and Julio Cototo. Thank you all for joining us. And now the first question: how would you describe growing up in an anti-racist household, and how has that impacted your parenting?
I think growing up, so it's really interesting because my lineage, right? My lineage is Afro-Indigenous, and it was very difficult to conceptualize that in a space, in two vastly different spaces. So I grew up in New York and Florida. And my parents are Manabitas, who mixed with African slaves that were brought in to what is now called Ecuador. And so it was very interesting growing up in New York, for example. We were surrounded by ourselves. Most of our family were there. By the time I was born, my parents had moved to New York. And then when I was 5, we moved to Florida. And so I noticed even though I was the youngest in my family, I noticed a vast change in relationships. And so in Florida, Sanford, Florida, very, very white. And so it was very split, black and white, but a lot more predominantly white. And so my parents, I think it starts with what they taught us at home. You know, what we learned in school, they always coupled with nope, that's not our history. That's not our religion. That ain't our people. You know, my parents always were no, this is our custom. This is our faith. We know that the invaders came and pushed their Christianity on us. We know that they came and pushed their white values and ways of living. And we know that schools are modeled. You know, my parents reiterated that all the time. What you're learning in school is not the whole story. It's not even a piece, it's a tiny little piece of the story. And so my parents really made sure that I learned history. And so absolutely, there was colorism, in my family and my extended family. Absolutely, there's anti-Blackness in indigeneity and in African heritage, people that have African descendancy. And so that's just a constant battle in and out of society, in and out, of my family. But I think what my parents did very well, and even up to this day, is keeping us informed. We were listening to speeches on cassettes and LPs, whatever, of groups all over the world. My dad was really big into Nueva Canción, which is protest music from the 60s and 70s and in Latin America. I went to a few protests with my dad when I was a kid. Leti Libertad, some of these singers that were part of the movement, we were engaged in. And so, so I think my parents did really well with giving us the background with what is the history that schools aren't telling us. And they tried coupling that with whatever school was teaching. We would have to learn the other perspectives.
Nice, thank you. And Julio, please share your perspective of this, especially being a parent yourself.
Yeah, no, it's I liked it because I feel like I could find the intersections with Alba, even though I feel on a completely different other side majority, because so I'm the son, grandson, nephew of Southern Baptist, Methodist, United Church of Christ pastors. Big time Christian family. And then I grew up in Amish country, and the reason I ended up in Lancaster, Latinos in Lancaster and Amish country, is because there's a lot of migrant work in Pennsylvania, and a lot of the Spanish-speaking pastors were brought to work with communities in Kennett Square, in Reading, where I was born, in Lancaster, where there was a growing Puerto Rican community. So all my base narrative is patriarchal, Christian, Western, etc., etc. Alba can fill in the blanks with better words than I can, I'm sure. But that is, you know, my A-frame understanding. But at home, and this is where I see the connection, is that there was a different narrative that was the private one, where I feel like it weighs my parents, my mom and my dad were in a way working against it, but still remain very, very Christian. But in a way, that's, I think, has been their eternal conflict, especially culturally, of how do you reconcile the indigeneity, the African story, the colonial story? Like, how do you reconcile the fact that you're praying and worshiping to a Christ that is a Western power structure, Western narrative? I mean, and I remember that one of my cousins who moved to LA from the Guatemalan side went total just, I'm done with church, I'm done with Christ. And he started to try to adopt as much of a Maya narrative and a Mayan spirituality. And it's just like everybody went bananas in the family. It's like, whoa, now you've gone too far. Claim the culture, but you can't like just leave Christ and Jesus now. In my school, because of this Christian, you know, pastor's kid profile, I get to go to a scholarship to a Mennonite school. And the thing about, and the trick about Christianity, and right now in this time, I really do believe that you are seeing it now implode upon itself. You know, a lot of the negativity of Christianity is really metastasized, and it's like, it's gone crazy in the sense that believing the narrative of red and yellow, black and white, we are precious in the sight, we are one Christian family, and you are my Christian brother and sister, allows you to trick yourself that you're not racist, or that the institution is racist, or that anything about Christianity could possibly be racist. It creates like this false, like, just shell upon your thinking to make you believe. And so how was I perceived now that I reflect back on my childhood? Because I do not believe that that was seen, but I was raised with the Christian right. I was raised with an immense amount of wealth because farmers and lumber and tobacco makes a massive amount of wealth. But, you know, you see them in a truck, and farmers, you're in a Christian school. You don't know those things at 4, 5, 6 years old. And then the other thing is when you now dissect the narrative and of what you're learning and how you're learning it, and even of Christianity itself, they saw me as a missionary kid. They saw me as some converted dark person. And in ways, I think sometimes we as a family would even play into that. And so those are the things reflecting back. So was I being raised in an anti-racist environment? Oh, no, it was full-on American Christian Protestant there, but it's Christianity. So like, it's about love and peace. It's not about other things.
Julio, so going off of that, how have you internalized that when raising a child, raising a child?
I think the biggest thing with raising the child is you either have to start finding completely different symbols. My wife is Mexican. She is also border. She grew up in El Paso, the El Paso Juarez community. And so I grew up Protestant. So even just the image of the Virgen didn't mean anything to me at all. But I see how through the patriarchal structure of Catholicism, there's at least the symbol that someone can find some identity that isn't, you know, that's something. And so I do see that in her family, there are different symbols that get presented to the women as much as possible, as much as culturally possible. But there's a discomfort now that I sense in all of us of just, maybe these symbols are bad too. So what do I do, at least as a parent, I put on my background is my child, she's only 25% Puerto Rican, but every Saturday she dances Puerto Rican, Afro Criollo music in an art form in particular where the woman is center and is empowered. And ella manda. And so even my Mexican wife we embrace even little symbols of that she's a bombera. And she does her ballet and she does jazz and tap, and you need them out of the house every now and then a little bit. You know, but the base understanding that we're giving her is something else that maybe we learned when it was cool in college, but not at 4, 5, 6 years old.
Thank you for sharing, Julio. Greatly appreciated that. And now with Andy.
So I grew up in a very unique situation, and I recently just brought up this story, about maybe 2 days ago. So my sister were at the university by the time I hit second grade. So all three of my older sisters were already in college, opening their minds up, taking courses, learning about ethnic studies from a whole different perspective, specifically from individuals who actually look like the ethnic group that they're studying. And so second grade, I bursted my classmates' bubble when we did Christopher Columbus Day. I talked to my classmates about what I learned from my sisters was that Christopher Columbus had murdered and slain the indigenous population here in the United States, and all the diseases he brought in, and how most of the things he brought were just problems. And I was put on recess detention for a week from my teacher because I freaked out all the other kids. And even from a young age, I was living in a white neighborhood in a white area. And so I had to be complacent with Western ideologies and Western conditioning and seeing Europeans as this great group of individuals. But at home, I had a Spanish-speaking mother who wasn't complacent with any of that. She was always pushing me to do more and learn more. And then I also had 3 older sisters who were going through the college experience and coming home and telling the young kids all the things that they're learning from a young age. And I think it's very interesting just because my neighborhood is very, very conservative. I think Francisco's seen a couple times on my own social media, we do have Confederate flags up and about across my neighborhood. And so it is an interesting experience coming home to a household that was very anti-racist and anti-Western ideologies, but then also having to go out and have to be complacent in it to survive. And I think a lot of people sometimes see complacency as a bad thing in those types of things, but a lot of people of color have to perform and partake in this culture in order to kind of get through and navigate through the K through 12 system, and then finally get to a bit better spot where they can actually speak out about it.
Versus, Alba, we share thriving versus surviving, and that's something that Andy has kind of shared. So Alba and Julio, have you been in similar circumstances?
I'm starting to understand their generational trauma, right? And then how it's informing my life and the way I'm living. And I now know, for example, me being told, me not being allowed to wear my hair down, for example, that's survival mode. It's not anti-Blackness, in a way it is colorism and it is anti-Blackness. But on the other hand, it was survival. You can't look like me, right? And in certain parts of the world, I'm too black to, I'm too black looking or have too many black features to be considered indigenous, right? And I've met that in a lot of places, including my universities, where I'm not allowed in some spaces because I don't match what I'm supposed to look like. And then, also my hair's too curly or whatever features don't look, I don't look too black enough, right? So I'm right in that liminal space. And so that is a survival space. I don't believe that we're thriving yet because collectively we're not, right? And so collectively we're not thriving. We're doing a good job of nourishing each other with such limited resources, as we're seeing, for example, all over New York with this mutual aid and stuff. And so I think we're doing really good with sharing those resources. But right now, a lot of what we think is success or thriving is individual, right? It's capitalistic. It's very, it's not the way we envisioned our thriving. And so I think, I just think my parents embodied that with some of their behaviors of even just capital punishment, right? That's something that some schools in the US still do, by the way. That's what my research says. But at home, right? My parents learned that from the violence in their schools. My parents went to these native schools that people think is so insane in the US, we think it's so far away. And in countries like Ecuador, it existed just 1 generation ago, right? My parents were literally in schools where they were beat. Literally, they had to kneel on rice and hold Bibles in their hand, right? Their indigeneity was beat out of them. And so that literally just happened 1 generation ago, 2 generations ago. My grandparents, everything that happened, right? And so we remember that our memory is still working. And so, yeah, we're working towards thriving. We're working towards our liberation. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we're still in that survival mode because of the trauma.
I was saying this to someone today that I feel at least the Latino community, however you choose to want to describe it or call it, because I think that even the name of this collective group or collective identity is kind of under question, because I do think it's under, I think it's a community trying to reclaim its own full identity of itself. And none of the terms that any of us use or have work. And therefore, people are like, oh, where's the Latino movement or the Latino Lives Matter or where's the rage of this? And I'm like, man, I think we really just kind of settled somehow to be a people again, like just recently. And therefore, I think what's interesting and why I enjoy working with youth is sometimes I could see it as like maybe I take a cop-out route because I work with kids and I give them these simulations about the future. Like, we're not going to talk about now. Talk about 30 years from now. But what's cool about it is that you give them the opportunity to construct and then even plant the seed of a thought. And so one of our topics with kids this summer that right now they're online debating, they have a tournament starting tomorrow, is about they have to present a new canon for this community. If you were to train leaders of the future for the Latino community for like 30 years from now, what would be the canon that you would give them? What are the books? What are the movies? What are the learning? Forget what you know. What would you give them? And it's cool to see what they come up with and just hope that as they do age up, that they do continue to challenge a lot of these structures and narratives. But I feel like even just among our own organizations or the organizations I'm a part of, it's just like getting over any kind of like inter-Latino beef between the Dominicans, the Puerto Ricans, the Mexicans, the Chicanos, the Boricuas, the Chicagoans, the LA. Like, I feel like everybody's kind of just like over that. I hope, mostly.
Yeah.
But now we can build up. I hope.
Thank you for all your responses. Now, how would you describe growing up in an anti-patriarch household? And how has that impacted your parenting?
So I think I've had this discussion before of prior queer scholars, and I think one of the things that bothers me a lot, I know it bothers a lot of queer scholars, is definitely the demonization of like our culture, specifically around anti-patriarchy and things like that. But it's something that we readily need to like accept and also just kind of target. I think both American as well as like the culture I grew up in, the Mexican culture, are very patriarchal. And sometimes I found myself choosing to partake in Western ideologies and just, conforming to the behavior of my white predecessors and individuals out here because they were more accepting of my queer identity than my own Mexican heritage. I can tell you that growing up in a very patriarchal household, I didn't get the opportunity to express myself in the way that I wanted to, or even seek the expression I was looking for, or learn about it without being punished. And I definitely think that I wish that I had more mentors when I was a little kid growing up to be able to kind of have learned about these issues, because now reflecting back, I wish I would have stuck out more. I wish I would have done more to carve out my own space, because I think something that Julio did point out was a lot of our individuals now, we're still situating ourselves in our own culture and our own beings. And going even to Alba's point, generational trauma, like I'm still healing through it. I'm still trying to resolve the generational trauma that comes from both sides of my family. But at the same time, I'm also trying to deal with like patriarchal things as well as racist things that are happening constantly around me. And so I think that definitely looking back, I honestly wish that I would have taken like a bigger dive into my queer identity at an earlier age. Because I've learned a lot from queer scholars and the sense of intersectionality and being accepting of that identity as well as everything else.
I'd like to thank I appreciate what Julio said first. I want to appreciate that for a second, and what Andy just said about queer identity as well, because that's been very difficult. But I want to thank. I'm going to get back to the thanks just because working with youth and thinking forward, I think, is like the ultimate goal, and so I really appreciate that thinking. I prefer to work with youth than college age or adults, even though I've worked with all age groups. So going to like the question of the parents. I want to think about the way Fanon talks about cognitive dissonance, because that's something that I think I experienced as someone who I didn't know what to call it, right? Like what I saw on TV were people that looked like me called Latino, Latinx, whatever all the words were coming up with, Hispanic, all the words that were called, that didn't behave like us at all, because our values and our religion and our faith and everything stemmed from our Afro-Indigeneity. And so, for example, that we didn't understand this idea of like the man having to be in charge. Like my sister was one of the people who decided, my older sister decided for us, like where we would live. Decisions we would make would be like, we'd call all the family to decide where the money would go. When I got my first car, you know, the whole family is involved in that decision-making process. And so like, the way we function is heterarchies, you know, which I've mentioned before, is like the opposite of hierarchies. Decisions are made communally in networks, and they're made, you know, power is kind of shared. And so people, for example, at schools, teachers would call and want to talk to my dad, you know, and it would be really weird because they're like, why do you want to talk to my dad? Talk to my mom. And then, you know, kids would make fun, teachers, people would make comments about like, oh, isn't it your mom's the one that wears the pants in the house? And we're like, but that's weird, right? Like for us, that's like a weird thing. Like, what is the role that she's supposed to play? I'm not saying that we didn't have patriarchal stuff in my family, because we definitely had different power imbalances in different situations. And definitely heteronormativity was the norm in my culture, or growing up in whatever all my culture was. But the patriarchal part specifically was really strange, because my dad had a femininity about him, has a femininity about him. My mom has a masculinity about her. So they already, you know, my mom was the one that fixed the car when it broke, or she's the one doing all the manly work. And my dad was a teacher, right? So he was an educator, a professor. And so for him, he wasn't doing the work that the man was supposed to be doing. But like in my family, you know, my parents don't wear wedding rings, for example, because like that's not a thing in our culture. You don't wear wedding rings. And so it's just interesting, like all the different ways that, it creates like cognitive dissonance, right? Like I don't know what's real sometimes, because it's like society had kept telling me that this is the way you're supposed to be. But I just wasn't raised like that. I was raised with a very strong woman, and my dad definitely was very pro-feminist. And I think he would call himself a feminist today. And feminism is about nurturing anyway. It's not about upholding just women, but it's about the culture of nurturance, which I think is what's really missing. And so that's something that I had to be in kind of both worlds because of like school, society, and then my family. And so that created kind of, the experience was jolting.
There's so much to react to. Thank you. You gave me too much now. Now I'm like lost in my own notes. So at home, I think that at least when it came to the dynamics between the binary men and women, let's be more specific, between heterosexual men and heterosexual women, that at least the one challenge that I did see was the power structure of who commanded, who was the law at home, who set the direction, you know, who was really in charge. And it was not my dad. You know, he was the big thinker, our education protector, sure, but it was mom. And however, and I think that my mom's, her strength as a woman came out of a reaction out of need. I don't think it was intentional, but she is one of 5, 2 older brothers, 2 younger brothers. She's the middle one, only woman. Her mother dies at 15 years old on her birthday. So now she has to be mom to the little ones, sister / counselor mom to the older ones. And then what's even funnier is that eventually she's the only one that has men, she has 3 boys. All her brothers have daughters. So she ends up having to like have 3 sons, marries a man who has brothers and all sons. She raised 4 sons / brothers. And so her strength comes out of just this trauma, this history that forces her to become incredibly strong and a leader in everything that she does. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's actually what attracted my dad to her, because he's, you know, mom commands. And so how did she raise her 3 boys? Well, she raised us in a weird way with a lot of that strength, but that also starts to feed into the patriarchal structures. But she would fight it constantly as much as she could. And where I saw it was when I did start to get to college age, and, you know, I'd started to go to other parts of the country or other parts of Latin America, or we took a trip to Guatemala, Costa Rica, and all of a sudden, like, the men never moved. I mean, I remember sitting in Guatemala at a home and the phone rings and it's like right here next to like the guy, and nope, out of the back she comes, answers the phone, and then hands the phone. Like, there was a dinner we were going to have, and for whatever reason, one of the men or the brothers, the older men of the family, were sick, so there was an empty chair. Julio, 13, you will now eat before all of these women and all of these kids. And Those were things that were like so foreign to me, but you could say that they're kind of not, but they were never part of our home. That was, I think, as best as they were able to do, but I think it at least has one example of how I can do it on 15, 20 different levels at my home.
Nice. And now how you bring that to now being a father?
So, when it comes to, she was talking about feminism, I kind of don't have a choice. Well, I guess I do have a choice, but I'm raising this little girl now. I have just brothers, just uncles, like my whole universe. I'm in a male fraternity. So I have this pretty male world. So it's extra work, but I appreciate it because it is the work that I feel like is allowing me to learn as I attempt to try to carve out a completely different, universe for her and understanding of the world than the one I or her mother had. So you have to try to, it's work. It is work. It's doing the work. You can't just you could just let it happen, but if you want it to alter and reframe or lay down a different type of just perspective and lens, you have to put
now
it
how have your parents prepared you for the anti-racist society that we're in, and how are you preparing your children?
I got really exposed to a lot of things at a young age by my mother. She was a monolingual speaker for years. I had to attend court hearings with my mom to go basically hear what my dad's sentence was going to be like growing up in criminal court. And they wouldn't provide my mom a translator sometimes. So I'm a little 7-year-old, 8-year-old going on my mom translating. And I got to witness firsthand the legal world's treatment of people who can't speak the language, English in general. I grew up in North County, San Diego, which is the red part of San Diego. Border patrol everywhere, people being scared of border patrol, people hiding, things like that, having them raid places. My mom prepared me with these experiences, I think, with the career that I ended up choosing and just prepping me. I remember she used to tell me, if I hear that something happens around you and you don't do something, she's like, te va peor cuando llegas a la casa. And that stuck to me. She taught me to speak up no matter what was going to happen. She was like, I will be there to help you. She pushed me to do protests. She pushed me. I remember I went to a protest in Tempe, Arizona in 2011, 2012 for a Metra conference. And she told me, if you get arrested or your friends get arrested, she's like, take the shot because tú tienes papeles. Si algo te pasa, it's going to be we'll get you off. But everyone else has a deeper issue with that. So my mom kind of taught me anti-racism from her point of view. My mom only had a 3rd grade education, yet she instilled this deep knowledge into all of my siblings. And we all ended up going to college and all ended up being per se social justice warriors in our fields. And so I think the overexposure to a lot of these experiences forced me to grow up pretty quickly, but I think it also forced me to accept the realities of our world, that we were growing up in a world that was definitely racist. And so I think just definitely teaching me that I had a voice from a young age and to talk back was a big thing. And I think that's really important for a lot of people of color and queer, and then just in general, people of color and youth. Specifically, youth are taught to be silent. I think the Catholic Church does a wonderful job of teaching people to be silent while sitting down and listening in prayer. And I compare it. I know my older sister was doing research on African-American Black Baptist churches and how they teach their congregation to speak up and speak back and talk back. And it was shown on average that a lot of these children had a higher self-esteem and confidence that a lot of Latino kids were lacking. And that definite research on Catholicism really kind of hit the mark with me, because if I would have stuck with church and I was doing my communion, I did my catechism, I think if I would have stuck with their teachings, I definitely feel like I would have been more complacent with everything that's happening around me and been watching Univision or any of those channels and being like, oh yeah, Black Lives Matters. Yeah, they're just making a fuss for no reason. But reality hits, my mom taught me better. And she definitely taught me to really question everything that I see on the media and ask, why are they doing this? So I think my mom prepped me with those experiences.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing, Andy and Alba.
I'm going to be super honest with this question, because I am going to talk about what my parents did to prepare me, but I also want to make space to talk about people who I think have prepared me better. Because I think my parents, again, they just had just enough knowledge. My mom didn't finish high school. My dad is the only one in all of his family, because he was one of the youngest that was able to even get to college, and it took him many, many, many years to get through all the systems. And he was still in college by the time I was, going to school and stuff, trying to find its way to do better. And so because of that reality, that poverty, my parents didn't spend a lot of time talking about anti-racism. I think that the most part that they instilled in us was, pride in ourselves. So even though we know that we're called mulatto, we know that we're called mestizo, we know what that means for us, right? We know what our customs are, what our beliefs, what our traditions. We know what is valuable. We know our knowledge is. We know that Spanish and English aren't our first languages, right? We know those are both colonizer language, and we know that linguistic hegemony is made up, right? So we know that there isn't one language that's more important than another language, right? So we learned that history. I think my anti-racist work really happened when I started teaching, and I really want to thank New York City for that, because New York City really, I just got incorporated with people that were using the language that was very specific. It was pro-Black, right? Anti-racist. It was very, very specific language that didn't just say, oh, we want diversity, right? We want everybody to get along. It was very specific with, we need to do pro-Black, right? Indigenous sovereignty work. It was very specific to like what we need to do, organizing, mobilizing, educating, moving forward, right? And fighting. And we're still fighting. And I still am connected with a lot of my people in New York, weekly, figuring out school systems, right? And so with them, I started building curriculum, right? I do Black Lives Matter at school. I started doing land-based pedagogies. So my community in New York, so my elders, not blood related to me, but like my chosen family, I think has taught me the most about anti-racism. And my students, my students, I've taught birth through college for the last 15 years. And I think my students, race always comes up whether or not we want to. Because like teaching here in the Midwest was very difficult because my students were predominantly white and they did not want to talk about race, and it's really evil stuff to me because of that. But I pushed it anyway, right? I pushed it anyway. But my younger students, my K-12 especially students, definitely wanted to talk about race, wanted to think about the future, wanted to build. And so like they came with me and next to me with questions, with curiosity, versus hostility. And I think sometimes my family, my literal blood related family, for them, they see racism as inevitable. They're just like, that's just white people came, invaded, took everything, and now they hate us. Like for them, it's very simplified. Like they're not seeing the repercussions of that, the material consequences of that. And so I think that I learned that later in life. I learned that in like my mid-20s, I finally started to learn like, what does anti-racism look like, right? What does pro-Blackness look like? What does honoring indigeneity look like?
I think that probably very similar to some of what Alba was saying. I think that thinking about it more and more recently too is just, I do believe that my parents taught us to love everything that was Black about us, everything that was indigenous about us, and everything that was everything else about us. And that's just who we are. But love it, love all of it. Relish in the drums and the cueros of, that come from Africa, revel in the features that, are older than the colonizer, take pride, but love it. Because I feel like they thought that if they at least could instill that very core love, that at least assimilation wouldn't penetrate completely. That there would at least be some little semblance of a half culture that would remain. I think that's about as good as they thought it could get. And I think that their hope, and this is something my dad had said to me, upon the birth of Sophia, because things were already brewing 5-6 years ago, is that I just remember like a lament, a father looking at his son. He's like, we really thought all this racist stuff was going to be over by now. Like we really, really thought it was going to be over. And just like this desperation, because they can't go back in time now. They can't go back in time and actually work to be anti-racist, just not people who aren't going to take racism, but not the counter. In terms of the concept, I definitely think that to kind of the Alba's point of trying to think of like, where do some of these concepts come from or new thinking? One, I've said it already, I think you surround yourself with youth constantly and you just listen to them, you'll follow the moving target. You will follow, and be able to react. I spend a lot of time with educators. I'm not a teacher in the classroom, but, they really will tell you what's going on. You know, when I lived in New York City and I was all around the DOE, I got glimpses and I got little pieces, but I didn't live it every day. I was there a day, a couple of weeks, but that was it. They'll tell you what's really going on, and you got to join organizations and you got to learn about organizations, because one thing I know I do, it's kind of my dad's, you know, probably hermeneutics and theological approach to things, is you gotta try to look at all sides. So I read a lot of Latino conservative literature. I read a lot of Latino conservative newsletters. Read Latino communists and social. You got to read it all, because at some point, if you conclude for yourself or you see that the community is heading in a particular direction, those that are not, you can try to understand where in the history did a particular path take a different turn, or that a decision was made to be different or to abandon your identity or your roots. I mean, a Ted Cruz happened somehow, you know, and you can study that. You can learn from that, and hopefully not try to be that. I know I took a shot at a politician. I apologize if I offended anybody with that. But, you know, I think that you can work. So now my challenge that I'm putting on myself very recently is that I'll be in the classroom online with the community college teaching high school students who are taking college credit. And I teach the humanities from the Renaissance to the present. It will be a very, very different course this year, because I'm going to actually attempt to do what the college is challenging me to do, is like, can you actually put a different spin that is not from the perspective of those who were colonizing? Can you try to actually do it from a perspective that isn't from the European and the West? So that's my challenge, because the kids don't really care about the other stuff anyway.
Thank you for your honesty, Julio. And now to our next point. So for our next question, have your parents prepared you for the anti-patriarch society that we're in, and how are you preparing your children?
I definitely didn't get much from my father on the anti-patriarchal work. I definitely got more of it from my mother. I know from a young age, I benefited from the patriarchy itself in all aspects. I got privileges that I never noticed as a kid growing up, because I just was living life and living in the patriarchy itself and enjoying it. And a lot of people are afraid to admit that. I think they're afraid to like bring up the nuances, or like people can evolve and they grow out of situations and they come to like reflect on their personalities and who they were. And my mom taught me from a young age that a woman's job is not to serve a man. And so she was kind of conditioning me to like heterosexuality kind of thing, and saying like, you know, when you get married to a wife, like I want you to do the beds too. I want you to clean. I want you to cook. I want you to do all that. So I was doing yard work on the weekends with my dad, but housework during the day with my mom. And I used to get so angry, because I was just like, I don't want to do every person's bed in the house. Like they can do their own damn beds. But it was a learning lesson, and it made me really realize like, oh crap, like this is what people expect of my sisters. And I think I got really lucky because of my sisters being in college when I was at a young age, because they weren't having any of my shit as a kid. And they would come home and always like reflect on the behaviors that I had as a kid and kind of push me to like learn from them. As soon as I did come out queer though, I think that everything kind of switched around. I lost all of my privileges that I was enjoying within the patriarchal structure, and I lost them. I became disenfranchised in this patriarchal system, as in my mom wouldn't let me be in the room with another guy by myself. My mom wouldn't let me be out at all hours now. I had to report. I had to give a certain time. And once again, I remember having a conversation with my mom, and she was just, and I was telling her, and she was like, well, this isn't me being patriarchal. This is, and it wasn't patriarchal in the sense, it was different terminology. And people often think that community members and people who don't have like a four-year degree, bachelor's degree, and things like that, don't have experience with this information. They just have different words for it and express it differently. So my mom did push to me that this wasn't about a patriarchal structure. This was like her house rules, because she was in charge. So I definitely started growing up in a matriarchy and exposing myself to what a matriarchy looked like, and grew as a person from it, I think. And in my queerness too, I think because of the intersectionality of all these identities, my queerness was able to like grow and thrive.
Thank you, Andy. But actually, I do want some clarity on, and Andy, I would like for you to respond first, and then Albert and Julio. What is the difference between a patriarchy and a matriarchy?
A couple things. A matriarchal structure, it can look, it's like basically there's an individual who is at the head of the household. It's most often used like matriarchies in the discussion in zoological terms. I use it in biology a lot. It's a discussion of like an animal species or a group of animals or likely organisms that are led by a female. Their structure is the power is passed through the female lineage and not through the male lineage. Versus in a patriarchal structure, property and wealth pass through the male. And then more nuances with socio and things like that in sociology. There's a formation of patriarchal cult that has expanded into the cultural world, and in the sense that it causes changes in the law as well as in the world, specifically around the male dominion. So the male is in charge of not only the household, but the decisions that are made out there, politicians, economically, things like that.
So I think this is something that is theorized in many different ways. And so, for example, the patriarchy is it's hierarchical, right? And it's hierarchical with men at the top and women, and I would say non-binary people at the bottom, gender non-conforming, trans people, not even not even considered to be part of the right, not even be considered. However, the reimagining of matriarchies isn't necessarily just like putting women in charge now, right? Which is like in a lot of ancient cultures, matriarchal societies give women like the last word, right? But it's not necessarily like they're making all the decisions. They just get to make it like the final one. But now I'm seeing a lot more theorizing with like matriarchy being a system in which there is, like I said previously, a culture of nurturance where it's not so much about women specifically, but about the culture of what we think is femininity or what we think is masculinity and how we define what that looks like. And so, for example, there wouldn't be a such thing as like toxic masculinity because we wouldn't be competing for, right? We wouldn't be competing for power, right? So it has to do with like a reimagining of power dynamics in which there isn't one person making all the decisions and oppressing others, right? It's a culture in which we're all uplifting each other, nourishing each other's thriving. And so I think that that's something that we're still building on. So we're still building on it.
I kind of agree with Alba that I think what I thought about in both responses, I'll answer it this way, is there really such a thing in that, aside from the culture and values, but then again, maybe this goes to the whole capitalism point, is that I don't see a lot of Latino matriarchies where wealth, assets, resources, land are transferred. The name is transferred, at least not by choice, in the same way. And so while those things still remain, right, that my wife now lives in quiet frustration that why the hell did she go and hyphenate her name and go file the paperwork? You know, why did she buy into that crap? You know, why did she buy to the hyphen thing? And, you know, why does Sophia have to be Coto like me? And all those different things, you know, so I don't know that they really exist yet. Maybe. I mean, so I don't know that I really see the same difference. I think we want to see, you know, I think I could answer, oh, well, you know, I lived in that because mom ran all the show, and I live in one here in my home because my wife and Sophia, they like run the show and they run my life. But I don't know if that's really what we're talking about. When I think about patriarchy, and it's something that my cousins and I, you know, last name's Coto from my Puerto Rican father, three uncles, 8 grandsons, no granddaughters. My only aunt had no children, so it is pretty male. And our grandfather was the oldest of 9, so even more, just more patriarchy. And we talk about during Abuela's funeral, which was about a year ago, and we actually sat around at the bar, first time all 8 of us have been there. It's like, so what do you think about this whole primogenito stuff? Because all of our fathers were pastors. Our grandfather was a pastor. And we were all, the firstborns, all named in the tradition of having our father's name. But it's much more than that. It comes from this place of of this primogenito patriarchal lineage thinking that comes from Europe and Spain. I mean, and it's passed on. And we talked about as cousins how that was something we were all collectively going to put aside and not buy into. And that, I don't know that we really bought into it anyway, but the symbols of it were there. And you could see that was already happening in just something as simple as Mario Efrain, the son of Efrain, Julio Irving, the son of Irving, Edwin Gabriel, the son of Edwin. And you are all male, and you were all the firstborn male, and so you must care for your younger brothers and your mothers and grandmothers, and, you know, be like this very just, you know, fantasy story of, you know, the knight on a horse. And it's kind of crap. one thing we just decided is just so we were going to do that. And where we saw it, I think also was when my grandmother's being buried. 90% of the comments were about her being my grandfather's wife. You know, and he was an important man, and he was an important pastor in his denomination, and he, you know, served and changed a lot of people's lives and touched a lot of people's lives, and he did great work, and I think in his space. But that was his life. His funeral happened already. And so Doña Lidia is being buried, but what we're going to talk about in Puerto Rico is about Don Efrain, who died 10 years prior. And it was really sad for us because the story in that last moment, the final story that gets told about our grandmother is about her husband. And so we're just not down with that part of telling the family story anymore.
Thank you for sharing. And so I'll go back to Alba with the, you know, how have your parents supported you and help you navigate it in an anti-patriarch environment?
This one I'm really proud of. I'm really proud of how my parents are proving or disproving that old dogs can't learn new tricks. Because my parents have always recognized that, like, you know, that they've inherited, you know, bad habits, or that they've assimilated into things that we don't necessarily believe in, but that we have to. You know, for example, we went to Catholic school for a few years because my dad couldn't find a good school for us to be in. He didn't mind taking 3 different jobs and my mom taking 2 other jobs, right, to figure out how to pay for that. But they were adamant telling us, like, no, this is not our culture. Like, don't pick up this stuff. We're here because the curriculum, you know, like we appreciate, like, the math, you know, some of the other, the knowledge is not necessarily the religious part. But now it's interesting because now my parents are retired, and it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see how, for example, they're using gender non-conforming language. You know, they're learning how to use Latine or Latinx when they speak English. They're learning to accept my identity. And so they don't like to say it, right? They don't like to say queer. And that's a word that took me a long time to get used to as well, because queerness when I grew up in the 90s was really dangerous to say, because Matthew Shepard was murdered and because there was so much trauma around just that word. So that's not the word we used. But my parents are becoming okay with that identity, even though, right, I've never brought home, right, I've only brought home guys so far because I've been scared to bring home a woman or a trans person. But my parents, I think that they're getting open to it, you know, and I think they're doing that with, like, their grandchildren. My brother, I have an older brother that's got 3 kids. And for example, our oldest child is, she's kind of like the tomboy, but we encourage, you know, my parents, I see them encouraging it, where they're saying, like, okay, she can identify however she wants. Sometimes she even changes her name, and we're kind of going with the flow with that. And I really appreciate, like, she helped fix my car the other day, and we're identifying that as, like, a masculine trait, but, like, we're just kind of figuring it out. But the part that I think is really beautiful is that, like, the baby, right? So the baby, we're letting, right, so born with male genitalia, like the male sex, or man, boy, right? He's a boy. Sorry, I'm mixing up everything because I can't think right now. But we're letting him figure it out too, right? And so, for example, now he wears long curly hair, and so a lot of people think that my nephew is a girl, and we just go with it. And, like, all of us are starting to use the word nibbling instead of niece or nephew, and grandchildren, you know, nietes in Spanish, my parents are starting to use. And they don't mind when people call, you know, their grandson or grandchild, they don't mind when people call him boy or girl. So they don't correct people. We dress them in however he wants. We put nail polish on when they want. And so they're kind of encouraging this, like, gender fluidity, which is really interesting because that's an ancestral knowledge. That's ancestral knowledge. They know that gender fluidity is something that we have always believed in. And we know that it was kind of, what's the word? We've been deculturated. We've been deculturated into the patriarchy and the binary, the gender binaries. And so I think my parents, you know, they're in their late 60s. The rest of the family are in their 70s. My dad's one of the youngest out of, you know, 13, and he's, you know, one of the youngest. So there's like 20, 30 years older than him. And my mom is one of 12, and she's like right in the middle. But, you know, all our elders are starting to kind of follow sometimes in my parents' footsteps. Some of them are really resistant. So we do have some family that is really resistant. They assimilated, you know, they bought into the Christian white supremacist culture. But I think the majority are really starting to be flexible. They're starting to be flexible because our youth are fighting, and they're fighting for all their identities, right? They're fighting for their race, their class, their genders. They're fighting to not be gendered. And so we're kind of And I think that is culture. I'm going to say that is part of our culture, that we look to the future generations. And so the elders have to learn from the youth, right? It's not that the adults make all the decisions and kids just have to be silently in the back and, to be seen and not heard. That is our culture. Like, we have to look to the future and build for the future, right? 7 generations forward, or however many forward. And so that's inspiring for, and it really helps me live the way I do. With that constant idea of, I'm still learning, no matter how old, right? My parents are retired and everything, and they're still like, okay, we know that we're still learning, right? We know that we're still in the in-between spaces. They're not, in my childhood, I wouldn't say that they did an excellent job teaching me about, outside of the gender binary paradigm. But I think now I'm seeing it a lot, that they're accepting the fact that they pushed for me to get to school, to get to this point, to then accept what I have learned because of their efforts. And so I really appreciate it.
It's incredibly difficult, because all the symbols of society around are just so, it's everywhere. And I say this in someone who's, I would say, really working on this, probably for one of the first times ever, on this whole anti-patriarch, or even just an understanding what that means. And so a lot of it, I think that what we try to do mostly is to nurture her free expression and her free creativity in the world and where there are no rules, and play. Because you have to be careful with the movies, and you have to be careful with the songs, and you have to be careful. Honestly, I didn't really think growing up about the fact that every Disney story is a damsel in distress story. I didn't think about that. I grew up with all guys, and all uncles, and all I didn't think about those things. I didn't think about the fact that every Latina or Black character is a number 2 in the whole Disney universe. They're never the number 1, ever, 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 ever. And if they are, they're not a princess or a queen. Very, very new. And so it's frustrating, because you don't have a lot of tools around you. You have to really research. So I'm one space, definitely I spend a lot of even more time in the cultural center, because at least through the Puerto Rican communities that I'm tied into, there are a lot of women that are writing books and doing research, and just re-educating us on a lot of those original traditions. Some of the things that Alba talked about, at least in the Taino context, where the woman in the Taino universe was a very different one than people would think or associate with Latinas or Hispanic girls. So yeah, it's taking work to do it.
With that said, that is all the time that we have. Thank you for everyone for joining us. And for everyone at home, make sure you like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on all our social media outlets at Latin Entertainment _presents. That is Latin Entertainment _presents. Also, you can listen to us on our various podcast platforms that vary from Anchor, Spotify, Apple Music, and Google Podcasts, just to name a few. Lastly, our next episode, in conjunction with this It All Starts at Home season, is going to be on raising and growing up Latinas. Thank you all for your time, and see you on our next episode as Latin Entertainment presents Conversamos.
Yeah, yo, is it that wrong? I'm making a song, I'm taking it back for the platform that I formed. You should help me transform. I run the reservoir, the predator, like a hungry carnivore. When I'm breaking through these heavy doors, this is Desert Storm. A metaphor to show I'm equipped and informed. I'm striking with the mega force, I'm lukewarm, your crew swarms. With the fear, my lyrics do harm. If you ain't lending a hand, I'm breaking it.